Imagine a country that for decades, was widely celebrated as one of Africa's most stable model
Right,
democracies.
the real gold standard for the region.
Exactly. A place where power transitioned peacefully and civic participation was just incredibly vibrant. Now, I want you to imagine that exact same country heading into an election where, well, critics argue the system is entirely controlled by the ruling party.
Yeah, it really feels like looking at two completely different parallel universes.
It does. And that is exactly our mission for today's deep dive into the source material. We are unpacking the upcoming April 12, 2026 elections in Benin. We want to understand exactly how this dramatic shift happened under President Patrice Talon, map out who the key players are, and really look under the hood at the mechanics of this so-called controlled system.
Right. And before we really get into it, I think it's important to quickly establish some ground rules for you, the listener.
Definitely.
The sources we're unpacking today contain some very strong political claims, heavy criticisms from various factions, both inside and outside of Benin.
Yeah, lots of very polarized viewpoints in the reporting.
Exactly. So just to be clear, our deep dive here is impartially unpacking the reporting and the arguments presented in those sources. We're not endorsing any specific political viewpoint. We just want to lay out the chessboard so you can see what's actually going on.
Okay, let's unpack this because looking at the timeline here, it sounds like we're looking at a situation where the fundamental rules of the game were rewritten while the players were still out on the field.
That is a really great way to frame it, because to understand that 2026 ballot, you absolutely cannot ignore the massive turning point that happened a few years ago.
Do you mean the electoral reforms?
Yes, the 2018 and 2019 electoral reforms. So President Patrice Talon comes into power in 2016. And by 2018, his government pushes through these incredibly strict new requirements for political parties.
And, I mean, the stated goal of that was what? Modernization?
Yeah, the government argued that Benin had way too many micro-parties, like over 200 of them, and it was causing inefficiency, so they wanted to streamline things.
But the result of that streamlining was pretty drastic.
Right, extremely drastic. The cost of entry skyrocketed. We're talking massive financial deposits and this new, very strict certificate of conformity that parties had to get from the Ministry of the Interior.
Wait, from a government ministry?
Exactly. And because of minor administrative issues, opposition parties just couldn't get these certificates in time. The result was that the entire opposition was effectively excluded from the 2019 parliamentary elections.
Oh, wow. Here's where it gets really interesting to me. It's almost like imagine a city changing its zoning laws overnight so that only the mayor's friends are legally allowed to own businesses.
That is a very apt comparison.
And I have to push back a little here, or at least ask the obvious question. If a parliament is 100% pro-government, can you even call it a parliament anymore, or is it just an echo chamber? How did that even happen without the whole system breaking down?
Well, the system did experience massive shockwaves. I mean, the public reaction to a 100% pro-government parliament was visceral.
Yeah, the sources mentioned there was some serious fallout.
Absolutely. You had violent protests, military deployment, live ammunition, and mass arrests. It was a really dark period. And that 2019 lockout, that entirely pro-government legislature, it essentially created the foundational blueprint for the simmering political tension we are seeing right now.
Right. Set the stage for where we are today.
Precisely. That is the board they are playing on as Benin heads toward 2026.
So if that's the board they're playing on, what exactly are they playing for on April 12, 2026?
It is a huge convergence. The April 2026 vote involves legislative consolidation, local political positioning, and crucially, it's the preparation for the 2026 presidential transition.
Okay, and just to clarify, Talon is constitutionally limited to 2 terms, right?
He is, and he has stated publicly that he will respect those limits and will not run again.
Okay.
However, critics, according to the sources, strongly believe he is actively trying to control his succession using the system he built.
I see. So who are the actual players right now? We've got the ruling bloc, obviously.
Right. The ruling bloc is mainly the Union Progressist, or UPR, and the Bloc Republican, the BR.
And they are fully aligned with Talon.
Strongly aligned. And remember that 100% parliament from 2019. Because of that, the UPR and BR currently control the state institutions, the parliament, and by extension, the electoral system itself.
Wow. And the opposition. I know the sources describe them as fragmented, But who is leading the charge there?
It's tough because they are severely weakened. A key figure the sources point to is Reckya Madougou.
Right, the former justice minister.
Yes. But she is currently in prison. She was sentenced to 20 years right before the 2021 election.
20 years. Wow.
Yeah. And other opposition leaders are either in exile, they've been disqualified, or they are just completely politically marginalized.
Wait, so let me get this straight. Talon says he's out, but the opposition is literally sitting in prison, in exile, or disqualified. It sounds like the ruling bloc, the UPR and BR, are basically running a race against themselves?
That's the structural imbalance that everyone is looking at. What's fascinating here is that this imbalance isn't just a side note. It is the central concern of the 2026 vote.
It's the whole story.
Exactly. It's not just about who wins the local mayoral seats. It's about whether an opposition even exists in a meaningful way to challenge the presidential transition.
Okay, so we know who is sidelined, but the obvious next question is, how are they being sidelined legally? Because you can't just throw everyone in jail, right? There has to be a mechanism.
Right, and this is where the specific mechanics of the electoral system come in. The most controversial one is called the sponsorship system.
Oh, the parentage.
Yes. So for a presidential candidate to even get on the ballot, they must be officially endorsed by currently elected officials, mayors, and members of parliament.
Okay, but wait. If the 2019 elections locked the opposition out, then most of those elected officials are
pro-government. Exactly. The ruling bloc controls almost the entire pool of potential sponsors.
So what does this all mean? If I'm an opposition candidate, I have to literally ask the ruling party's loyalists for permission to run against them.
That is exactly how the critics describe it. It makes it nearly impossible for genuine opposition candidates to qualify.
That is wild. It's like applying for a job where your only reference has to be the exact person you were trying to get fired. Why would they ever give you that recommendation?
They wouldn't. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is how a system controls an election perfectly legally.
Right. It's all on paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily about stuffing ballot boxes on election day. It's about using bureaucracy to decide who even gets to be on the ballot in the first place.
And it doesn't stop with the bureaucracy, does it? The sources mentioned judicial pressure, too.
Yes. We talked about Reckya Madougou, but opposition figures generally face a high risk of arrests and legal charges. And the reporting notes that these charges are widely seen by critics as politically motivated. Plus, you have to look at the media landscape. The independent media space has narrowed drastically. Critical voices are frequently silenced, which means there are very few watchdogs left to call out the bureaucratic maneuvers.
Right. So you have a sponsorship system blocking the ballot, courts putting pressure on the leaders, and a silenced media. It's like a fortress.
It is. But just when you think you understand the political maneuvering, there's a real-world physical wild card that complicates everything.
The situation in the north, right?
Yes. The geography and security of northern Benin. The region is experiencing increasing instability.
And this is a direct spillover from the Sahel jihadist conflict, isn't it?
It is. Groups are moving south, and it's a very real, very dangerous threat. But according to the sources, this instability serves two deeply conflicting purposes.
Oh, so?
Well, on one hand, it provides the government with a completely legitimate security justification for tighter state control. They have to protect the borders, which means military deployments, curfews, and restricting movement.
Which makes sense from a national security standpoint. You have to keep people safe.
Absolutely. But conversely, those exact same security measures raise major concerns about voter suppression. If you lock down a region, you are inherently reducing political participation and campaigning in those affected areas.
Oh, wow. This is a real rock in a hard place situation for the listener to consider. I mean, you have a very real, very terrifying threat from jihadist violence spilling over. But if the state locks down the region to protect it, they also happen to lock down the voters.
Exactly. And this raises an important question about how crises can be weaponized.
Right.
The Sahel spillover forces us to look at how genuine national security threats can blur the lines with political opportunism. When a government already controls the electoral bureaucracy, it becomes incredibly difficult to tell where necessary civilian protection ends and intentional voter suppression begins.
Because the end result looks exactly the same on Election Day. People aren't voting.
Precisely. The security crisis acts as this opaque shield,
It's incredible. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, it's just amazing to look at the journey Benin has taken. I mean, from a celebrated model democracy to a heavily managed political system that's about to face a massive critical test on April 12, 2026.
It really is a striking transformation.
It shows you how quickly democratic norms can be reshaped, not by like a sudden coup, but through legal reforms, judicial pressure, and security crises.
Absolutely. And I'll just add, as a final synthesis of the source material, while the reporting paints a picture of a heavily skewed playing field favoring President Talon's ruling blocs, the UPR and BR, you can't ignore the resilience of democratic participation there.
Right, the people are still engaged.
They are. The fact that opposition figures and citizens are still fighting to participate, despite these massive hurdles, is what makes the upcoming 2026 election a massive historical pivot point for all of West Africa.
It really is. It's a moment to watch. And it leaves you with a lingering question to ponder on your own. As you look at democracies worldwide, it makes you wonder, does a democracy